Yeah, I think, yeah. Okay, sorry about that, everyone, but welcome. Thanks for popping in and joining us today. And today we do have a really good one. I think you're going to like it. And yeah, so I'm going to hand it off to Marika real quick. Marika, in this space, we have a little bit of time for any of the announcements or any special presentations, short presentations by any of our constituents. So Marika, you want to kind of bring that up to speed?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time we send out an announcement through Constant Contact, you'll see there's a button, and we really welcome you to click that button and share with us any events that are coming up in your community that are wildfire related that you would like us to help promote, as well as any resources that you think might be helpful for the community. So yeah, look out for that on the Constant Contact announcements. It'll be a link to that form, and then we can help you promote that through this Fire Alliance space. So I'll just promote that there is a Resilient Landscape Coalition Gardening in the Defensible Space Zone workshop coming up. And it is on the 27th of September at 5 till 7:30 p.m. And I will drop the link to register for that in the chat. And I think it's actually focused mostly in the East County, so Sonoma area. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting. So please join that if you have time.
Yeah, and I think we'll be promoting those through some of the fire safe folks out there, like fires at the Grove Street Fire Safe Council and Gerke Road Fire Safe Council. I think we'll be promoting it through them as well.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, back to me, I guess. Yeah, in case you haven't figured it out already, we are live streaming on YouTube. Oh my goodness. And then the recording will be available immediately in its raw form on YouTube with that ugly beginning now, immediately after the presentation. But I think what we might have to do, Marika, with this one, because of that little snafu, is go in and edit off the front of that messy part, if we can. And so yeah, and also we're not recording it otherwise, so we'll just go off of what's recorded on YouTube. And then for the chat, if you don't mind, drop your name and affiliation, if any, in the chat, so we can share with each other who's all here. And then also in the chat is where we'd like you to put your questions for our presenter. As you think of questions, just go ahead and drop them in the chat. Don't wait till we open it up for Q&A. And that way we'll have a laundry list of questions to get to dive into once our presenter is finished presenting. And then depending on how things go, we might even freeform a little bit after the presentation and just have a group chat. Along the presentation, we will from time to time drop information in the chat. I think Marika is doing that now as I'm speaking. Information about related to the presentation and things like that. And then also you folks as attendees, if you think of something you want to share, by all means, feel free to drop it in the chat to share with others. At Fire Safe Sonoma, we're always interested in learning more from you all because by no means do we know everything. Okay, so I'm really happy to introduce our presenter today. Today we have Michael Newman. He's Senior Director for Law and Public Policy for the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, otherwise known as IBHS. And Michael leads public policy engagement for the IBS, and he works at the federal, state, and local level, like our level, to inform public policy with scientific information that IBHS provides to help advance policies and programs to strengthen the resilience of families, businesses, and communities. So they're a science-based entity that provides a wealth of information to insurance companies and others to help us all make good decisions. And the IBHS, with regard to wildland and fire safety, has a huge component of what they do devoted to wildland fire studies and safety. one of their programs is the Wildfire Prepared Home, which is really cool. And Michael's going to tell us about that and other things. So, Michael, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Yeah, really love having you here. And I'm just going to hand it off to you. And you've got the screen share capabilities. You are good to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Roberta. And hello, everyone. My name is Michael Newman, and I'm with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge someone who I see lurking here in the Zoom boxes. Steve Quarles was a longtime wildfire researcher at IBHS. The things I'm going to talk to you about today are really grounded in work he has been doing throughout his career. So I just want a little tip of the cap to Steve. Thank you. And we do see Steve at a research center from time to time still. And hopefully next time I'm down there and you're down there, our paths will cross. So I'm going to share my screen. You'd think after all the Zoom presentations of the pandemic, this would get more fluid. Here we go. So welcome, everybody. I'm here to talk to you today about wildfire science. I understand that you all, as residents of Sonoma County, understand wildfire in a very deep and personal way. What I'd like to do is to kind of take a step back from the personal and talk a little bit about the science that helps us to understand how wildfire intersects with the built environment, with your communities, with your homes. And also talk a little bit about a program that we launched earlier this summer called Wildfire Prepared Home, that's grounded in our research into wildfire resilience, and that can meaningfully help you to reduce the risk that your home will ignite in a wildfire context. So those are the things we're going to talk about today. I'm going to walk you through who we are at IBHS. I'll walk you through some of our wildfire science, and then introduce you to Wildfire Prepared Home and talk to you about how you can make it a part of the work that you're doing in your neighborhoods, through Fire Safe Sonoma, through your FireWise communities. Wildfire is one of those perils that requires all hands on deck. And the more we can do to integrate the way that we are kind of collectively trying to reduce that risk, be it in the public policy realm, be it in the neighborhood realm, or even, as I'm going to describe to you, the actions that you need to take to your home to reduce your individual risk, that's going to put us all in the best position to succeed and reduce the risk for everybody. So, got it. All right. So who is IBHS? We are an independent, nonprofit scientific research and risk communications organization. We're supported fully by our members from the property insurance and reinsurance industry. From our research center, which you can see there on the screen, we study the way that homes and businesses can be more resilient to severe weather. To put it simply and bluntly, we crash test buildings. We're able to recreate severe weather and then at full scale test how that severe weather impacts homes, impacts commercial properties, and then how to make them less vulnerable to those forces. We believe that the disruption, the dislocation, and the damage that's all too frequently a part of severe weather, and wildfires in particular, can be reduced and in some cases even prevented by making our built environment, the homes where we live, the businesses where we work, more resilient to those forces. That we can make families stronger and we can make communities stronger by making our buildings stronger. So I mentioned that we talk about severe weather at IBHS. We conduct research at full scale on 4 perils: wind, rain, hail, and wildfire. Before we talk about wildfire today, I'd like to give you a brief tour of some of the work that we do inside of our research center, which is located in Richburg, South Carolina. If you go to our website at ibhs.org, we have a whole host of videos, some of which content you're going to see in just a minute. But if you're interested in our wind research, in our hail research, in our rain research, as well as the wildfire, we have a lot of really great material there for you to peruse. So that's ibhs.org. But here, let me take you inside our center. It features a 6-story test chamber the size of an airplane hangar. with 105 fans, 6 feet in diameter, capable of generating Cat 3 hurricane winds. We also, as I mentioned, conduct research in hail, and we've actually invented new ways to generate realistic hailstones that support our testing. Previously, everyone used steel balls, if you can believe it. This is some of our wildfire research, which we're going to get into in just a minute. But we're the only facility in the country capable of generating embers and testing how embers and wind and the built environment interact. I mentioned wind before, and really this is the type of post-disaster site we're trying to stop. We conduct post-disaster investigations as well as research in our facility on residential and commercial structures. Ultimately, this does happen in the real world, but it doesn't have to. We know how to make buildings more resilient to severe weather. And it's with working with organizations like yours, people like you, communities like you, that we take that research and we translate it into action to try to make our homes, our businesses, and our whole communities more resilient to Mother Nature. So let's talk a little bit about wildfire. Before we get into the research, let's talk about some of the societal things that are at play. Wildfire is natural. I tell people wildfire was around at the time of the dinosaurs, right? When T-Rex was walking down California, to the extent that there were T-Rexes in California, there were wildfires. It's something ecosystems need to be healthy. And yet when those wildfires reach suburban communities, the places where we live, that natural phenomena becomes a catastrophe. And the fact is, the population in the WUI is growing. According to FEMA, nearly 99 million Americans, 1/3 of the nation, now live in what's considered the wildland-urban interface, the WUI, that area where homes and communities are intermingling with undeveloped wildlands and vegetative fuels. There's a 2020 study out of Colorado that found that about 60 million homes in the United States are within an area that has already burned or within a kilometer of a previous fire. That number is surely higher today. And those startling numbers don't even really fully capture the risk. And that's because, as I'm about to tell you about, embers, which are a hallmark of wildfires, can travel a half mile or more ahead of where the flames are. As a result, the area that we consider to be the WUI is sort of porous, getting more populated, and the risk extends out beyond, depending on the prevailing winds. One other thing to keep in mind is that the built environment, unlike for any other hazard, the built environment fuels wildfire. In a flood, in a hurricane, in a tornado, none of those hazards get worse because they damage homes, they damage property. And yet in the wildfire context, once a wildfire reaches where people live, reaches those homes literally fuel the fire and contribute to its spread and severity. Our homes are not just at risk, they contribute to the risk. Ultimately, this means that investing in built environment, a resilient built environment, isn't just about protecting vulnerability, although it is about protecting the vulnerable. It's about controlling the severity and the scope of wildfires. And that's really what we're trying to do. So a few items about wildfires. As I mentioned before, embers are a hallmark of wildfires. Home ignition happens in the wildfire context 3 ways: from direct flames, from radiant heat, and from embers. And up to 90% of homes are ignited by embers. If we can find ways to control home ignition from embers, we can reduce the risk that homes will burn in wildfire. And home ignition is key because if a home is ignited, whether by ember or some other means, there's a 90% chance it's going to be a complete loss. There is no partial damage when it comes to burning homes in a wildfire context. So IBHS takes all of this. We know what this is going on. And for more than 10 years, we have been focused at our research center in trying to better understand wildfire and how it affects the built environment. I want to show you this picture up front because to me, it's just so evocative of the things we're able to learn and how we translate that into action at our research center. This is a photograph capturing our ember generation machines. You can see them coming from the right. Behind it is our wind tunnel that's kind of blowing those embers at a steady rate. And you can see, I'm going to use my mouse here, you can see how they hit the structure, they go down and they collect. They collect in this 5-foot zone right around the structure. What this tells us is that 5-foot area in California is being referred to as zone 0. Others call it to an ember resistant zone or a home ignition zone, is so essential because if there's any combustible material in that zone, it will ignite, and that ignition can lead to the home igniting. So why do we care so much about that area and home ignition? I'm going to show you a video to explain. This is video starts just at the moment of ignition. We're at a different view of those ember generations being blown at 2 structures, a duplex. One is built to a high level on the right, a high level of wildfire resilience, consistent with our wildfire prepared home. Now requires the left, as you can see, is not. And we're 30 seconds now from first ignition. And there are flames that are underneath the deck. There are flames that are roaring around the corner of that structure. They're climbing up the wall. They've now hit the roof at 40 seconds. On the right, where there is a non-combustible home ignition zone, where there is non-combustible siding, where the windows and the doors are protected, no ignition. Think about that. 1 minute past ignition, and this entire house is nearly in flames. That's how quickly it can happen. And that's why when we're talking about reducing the risk of wildfire damage to homes, we are so focused on reducing ignition of embers in and around the home. Ultimately, it is a system, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of wildfire prepared home. It is a system of actions that collectively help bend down the risk curve. But it's not just a system of actions at the home. I alluded to this before. It's a system of actions by individuals, by neighborhoods, by communities, by local government, by state government, by even federal government. All of this is integrated. So much of wildfire resilience is about trying to bend down that risk curve at every single layer of action. I understand from Roberta and Marika that there's been a lot of talk within this group about Firewise communities. I think that's wonderful. We work very closely with NFPA, and we think that Firewise can be an incredibly powerful way for neighbors to come together to act collectively. And I will assert to you that there is absolutely nothing inconsistent with wildfire prepared home and Firewise communities. In fact, they work really well together. They are focused on different things. One thing is focused on collective action and getting engagement and energy behind wildfire resilience. And then wildfire prepared home is about to, as I'm about to go through, is a program that can help you as a homeowner reduce your risk by taking a set of actions and then having it verified by an independent inspector. So I'd encourage you, take wildfire prepared home back to your Firewise communities. Talk about it as a group. If you can, want to set some goals for yourself at how high of a percentage of your neighborhood, of your Firewise community can get on board with wildfire prepared home, can get those designations. Because we know, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, we know that wildfire resilience is about property level risk reduction and community level risk reduction. The community piece is a lot harder. It's very complicated. We're still studying it. We're still learning about it. But one thing I can tell you is that in any given neighborhood, the more homes that have taken mitigation actions that are meaningful, the better. So I'll leave you with that thought as I start telling you about Wildfire Prepared Home. So Wildfire Prepared Home, which we launched this summer in California, is the first wildfire mitigation designation program in existence. And by that, I mean, it is a set of requisite mitigation actions you must undertake that when taken collectively bend down your risk. And then you go through a process with us, which I will walk you through, that once you've taken those actions, you demonstrate that you have, it is verified by an independent inspector, you're issued a designation from IBHS. That designation is the symbol that you have taken these mitigation actions, that your risk is reduced. And that symbol is understood by the insurance industry. It's understood by Sonoma County. It's understood by various stakeholders who have a vested interest, whether financial or otherwise, in your resilience, your home's resilience. So let me walk you through what's included in wildfire prepared home. There are 3 categories of actions. First, the roof. You need to have a Class A fire rated roof, maintained clear of debris, and you need to have non-combustible gutters and downspouts. Now, the good news is that most of you probably already have a Class A fire rated roof. The vast majority of homes in California do. Now, if you don't, because that is a place where embers can collect, that is an investment you're going to want to make, is getting a Class A fire rated roof. There's also 2 actions under building features. First, installing ember and flame resistant vents, and second, ensuring that there is 6 inches of, at least 6 inches of vertical non-combustible clearance around the base of the wall. I'm going to use my mouse here to show you the entire exterior of your house. You want to have 6 inches of non-combustible material going all the way around. And the reason for that, think back to that picture I showed you of those embers collecting. Right? Embers tend to collect in that corner. They get trapped right there. And so you want to have at least 6 inches of non-combustible material so that doesn't ignite and then wick upwards. In a moment, I'm going to talk about Wildfire Prepared Home Plus, which is an additional set of actions you can take. And that includes having entirely non-combustible siding. But for our Wildfire Prepared Home Base package, you just need to have at least that 6-inch layer. And finally, defensible space. I mentioned this before. I'm going to reiterate it now, and you'll probably hear me foot stomp it a 3rd time before we're done. The most important thing for you to remember is how critical it is to have a completely impeccable, non-combustible zone 0 or 0 to 5 space going all the way around your structure. There's no substitute for it. If there is matter there that is combustible and embers collect, it will ignite and those flames might hit your home. You don't want that. Our research tells us over and over and over again how important this is. It's also really hard. I get it. People like their bushes. They like their landscaping. They like their trees. I'm sure many of you have kind of treasured pieces of vegetation that exist in that 5-foot zone around your house. And I am telling you, as much as you love it, you don't need to get rid of it, but you do need to move it away. There are hardscaping options. There's lots of different ways that you can approach having non-combustible zone 0, but I can't reiterate enough how important it is. Other defensible space pieces, if you have decks, you need to clear and maintain that underdeck area. If it's a low elevation deck that's 4 feet or less off the ground, it's hard to get under the deck. So we require that you enclose it with a non-combustible material to prevent debris from collecting. Your yard, of course, needs to be maintained clear of any debris, depending on how big your yard is, following defensible space requirements for 30 feet and 100 feet. And then if you have fencing, I know in California, a lot of people have privacy fences. That's great. But if it is within 5 feet of your structure, whether that's connecting into your structure or running parallel to your structure, that fencing must be non-combustible. Fences are excellent wicks that bring flames to the home. And again, that's not something you want. So next, I'm going to talk about the program itself, how the operations of it, how it works, what you can expect to see if you apply for a designation. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I do that, I did promise you these additional mitigation actions for Wildfire Prepared Home Plus, 6 additional actions: removing back-to-back fencing, eliminating combustible siding, enclosing eaves, enclosing the under bay windows, upgrading to a fire-resistant deck if you have a deck, upgrading your windows, covering any gutters, and moving any outbuildings at least 30 feet away from your home. Before I move on to the operations, I do want to mention some other things happening in California and how this program fits in. Right? You all may be aware that the California Department of Insurance has issued a set of proposed rulemaking around wildfire mitigation actions and how insurance carriers in the state kind of treat them. That rulemaking, as of a week or so ago, was referred to the Office of Administrative Law, which, as I understand it, is kind of a final step before finalization. So that rulemaking, and I'll leave it to the department to describe it best, but for my purposes, for the purposes of this conversation, that rulemaking includes a set of mitigation actions at the home and community level that insurers will be required to take into account and reflect in their rate making, which is how they price your insurance. I will say this: we worked closely with the Department of Insurance for a long time prior to them developing that set of regulations, and the mitigation actions that they include in the rulemaking are wholly aligned with the mitigation actions you see up on your screen that are included as part of Wildfire Prepared Home. It's our expectation that once this regulatory process runs its course, that insurers will be able, under what is then a final rulemaking, will be able to utilize Wildfire Prepared Home to meet the requirements of this new regulation. We're gonna have to wait and see how that all plays out. As you are probably aware, the regulatory process can be both onerous and occasionally time consuming. So we're all sort of taking a wait and see approach. But that is our expectation. And frankly, we've talked to the Department of Insurance, and they've said publicly that they support Wildfire Prepared Home and they want to see it a success. So we are looking forward to seeing how all of that shakes out. Now, let me walk you through our designation process. We have a thorough process to make sure that homes that receive a designation actually meet the standard. But we look at it like opportunity to engage and educate at every step along the way. So if you as a homeowner are interested in our program, you go to our website, wildfireprepared.org, and you can find a lot of materials about the program, about wildfire resilience. You'll have a homeowner guide that you can explore to, on a step-by-step basis, see if your home meets all of our requirements. We'll have a free online home assessment. You can take that. There are simple yes/no answers, and that will give you insight into whether you're ready to apply for the program because you think you've met all the requirements, or if there are areas where you need to do some work or make some investments to update your home's resilience. There's an application process on the website. There's a fee of $125 that helps us pay for the inspections. After you apply, within a number of weeks, there will be an inspector that comes to your home, conducts an external inspection of your property to see and verify and document that you have met all of the mitigation actions required by the Wildfire Prepared Home Technical Standard. Then that goes through a quality assurance process, and finally, you're issued a designation. So let me go through each one of those pieces. This is what the homeowner guide looks like. It's that step-by-step guide to meeting our standard. And this is the free online home assessment. Again, yes, no questions at every stage. What's your roof? You know, are you eligible? Do you live in California? Do you have a single family home that's 3 stories or less? Roof, building features, defensible space. It walks you through it. You answer it, and that will tell you whether or not you're ready to apply. Finally, there's an application process, and following the application, we have the inspection. Someone will come out to your home. They will have tape measures. They will be measuring your defensible space, the 0 to 5 area. They'll be looking at your fencing. They'll be looking at your downspouts. They'll be looking at your roof and your windows and your siding. They are there to help make sure that you have the actual resilience that the program promises. And on that note, I do want to emphasize something. This is not a wildfire-proof program. This will not completely remove your risk. This will reduce your risk. And that's just an important thing to keep in mind. If you have a wildfire-prepared home and there's an evacuation order, you evacuate. You follow all local laws and regulations. If there is danger, you get out. And hopefully your home will be waiting for you when you return. We cannot eliminate the risk of wildfires, particularly given the community as well as property level components of it. But what we can do is help you reduce that risk. Finally, let's see. There we go. There's a quality assurance and designation. This is a sample designation that I referenced. You'll be provided this through the portal on the website. But that's the designation lasts for 3 years, but that's not the end of the story. We know that resilience requires ongoing vigilance and ongoing action. As you all well know, debris can pile up, vegetation comes back. So you can't just get this designation and then say, okay, I'm good for 3 years. We have an annual landscape review as part of the program. We're going to try to make it easy for you where you can take photographs with your mobile device, submit them, and that will help make sure that you are staying on top of all the requirements up until the point of your designation needing to be re-upped. At the end of that 3-year period, you will be able to reapply for another designation. So earlier this summer, as I mentioned, we launched in Paradise, California. As you well know, Paradise was devastated by the Camp Fire in 2018, and they're committed to rebuilding more resiliently, which is why we chose to launch our program from Paradise. In fact, the picture of the home you saw when I was talking about wildfire prepared homes mitigation actions is right here on the screen in front of you. That's a real home from Paradise. And the way that Paradise is really leaned in is that as a town, they've updated their ordinances to create requirements for everyone who lives in the town that are aligned to the requirements of wildfire prepared home. Meaning every new home is going to be built to the standards that we require, making every new home in the town eligible to apply for and receive a designation from us. So this first home in Paradise brought our program to life and showed us what's possible. And it's why it's so important to us to work not just with the state of California, but also local communities, local governments in California, because so many good things and necessary things happen there. I'd like to highlight that we have been working with the government of Sonoma County. They are doing some really wonderful work, as you well know, with some grant programs and some defensible space assessments. And we're working with them closely to see what we can do to, as much as possible, align what the county is doing with your taxpayer money with wildfire prepared home. Because we feel very strongly that our approach, backed by science, is the right way to approach wildfire resilience at the property level. One last note on communities. I mentioned it's complicated. There is a huge set of variables that you have to identify. You have to understand how those variables interact with each other, and you have to find data that fills in the gaps in those variables. Wildfire mitigation ultimately is a team sport. We need everyone in towns and neighborhoods doing their part, whether that's through town ordinances, whether that's through Firewise communities and collective action, or something else. We're looking for ways to differentiate those communities, those neighborhoods that are investing in wildfire preparedness and resilience. So there's going to be more to come from us on the community dimension of wildfire resilience. But I do want you all to know that it's something we're looking at. And while I don't know what it's going to look like at the end of the day, I do know that collective action, that having multiple homes at some threshold within a given neighborhood that have reached wildfire prepared home on an individual basis, when brought together, is going to be part of the solution. So that's it from me. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll be very, very happy to hear from you all and answer any questions you might have.
Great, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. So we do have a few questions.
Sure.
But I'm going to lead off with the most recent comment, not really a question, dropped in the chat. And I think we might be able to have a little, might be able to expound a little bit on that thought. So somebody wrote in the chat with regard to the photo of the home in Paradise, you guys highlighted. They said something to the effect of, who would want to live on land that has no green things? This is not sustainable. And I don't think we're saying that. I think that, like you mentioned, the 90% of the of the problem is in that 0 to 5.
Mhm.
At Fire Safe Sonoma, we've actually for a couple of years now have been working with a group, we call it the Resilient Landscape Coalition. And we're teaching people how to have resilient landscapes in the area between 530 to 100 feet around the home. We're working with the Master Gardener of Sonoma County program, the Habitat Corridor, and Sonoma Ecology Center with that endeavor. And so can you speak to that a little bit? I don't imagine that we're saying you have to not have anything around your home, period. But the key area of focus, according to the science, really is that 0 to 5 in the roof.
Yeah, I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth for the moment. So I beg your all's forgiveness. So one, we are not asking you, the science is not directing you to live in a concrete jungle.
Right.
You do not have to get rid of vegetation. You do not have to get rid of green space. And you do need to shift your aesthetic judgments about what is beautiful. We all have this sense of what home looks like and what beauty means on our properties. And what I'm asking you to do is expand that a little bit. For that 5-foot area going all the way around your home, think about ways to beautify it that don't involve combustible material, that don't involve vegetative material. Once you hit that 5-foot mark, there can be green, right? You can't have, for example, 6 foot away from your house, a tree that extends up and the branches are all over your roof and your 5-foot zone. That won't work. But there are ways to safely have vegetation on your property, given, it's all going to differ based on size and how big your lot is. But to be clear, you don't need to live in a concrete jungle, and we do need to reconceive beauty in a wildfire context.
That's an interesting thought I'll share with y'all. When I was still a fire inspector, I was doing a fire inspection of a new building. And on the outside of the building is a big red fire bell. Says, if bell rings, call 911. And I'm walking around with the building owner, the project superintendent, and the architect. And the architect asked me, he says, we would really like to paint that bell. It's bright red now. Are we allowed to paint it to kind of be less conspicuous, maybe blend in with the color of the building? And I'm like, well, why in the world would you want to do that? And the architect says to me, well, it's ugly. And I go, no, in my world, there's nothing ugly about fire safety. So I think it's actually quite beautiful. And that's a way to look at it. By the same token, I personally like having plants around me. So I think, it's a balancing act. I think in terms of reducing overall risk and what the kinds of risks you're willing to accept for the world you want to live in, and think of your community too as a whole. I think we're in a space now where we can't allow ourselves to be completely selfish and think, well, I only care about what's going on in my house, so I'm just going to let everything go. Well, what about your neighbor and the person across the street and so on? We really need to think about this at a community level.
Yeah, Roberta, that's such a great point. And it really can't be emphasized enough. In the wildfire context, your neighbor matters to you and you matter to your neighbor. And in so many ways, it's like the old poem. I love it. No man is an island. That poem, while written hundreds of years ago in England, is tailor-made for the wildfire context. We have impacts on each other's risk, particularly in suburban neighborhoods where there's more dense construction.
Yeah, agreed. So back to the questions. One of the questions I thought was really, really a good, interesting question, and I shared this question. So when the IBHS inspectors come out to evaluate the property, will they be able to provide the owner occupant with suggestions on how to remedy what their findings show? And also, are they allowed to, I'll take this a step further and ask if those inspectors will be able to provide the homeowner with maybe a list of references of people they can connect with to help get some of that stuff done?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the inspectors will not. It's not the inspector's role to be engaging with the homeowner and providing a real-time assessment of what may be deficient. But what an applicant will receive through the website is a report, if they do not achieve a designation, is a report from us identifying those steps that need to be taken to reach the level of wildfire prepared home. At present, we're not identifying particular service providers or contractors. That can be a little tricky because there's some good ones and there are some not so good ones out there. And without being on the ground, it's sometimes hard to know the difference. But I think that is an area where this group, Fire Safe Sonoma, or Firewise Communities, could really play a constructive role in having a vetted list of contractors who can do the type of work required to get to a wildfire prepared home designation. So if someone is looking to get there before applying, they know who to call. Or if they get their report that says, well, you're 90% of the way there, but you need to do X, Y, or Z, they know who to call for X, Y, or Z.
Perfect. Thank you. And then a question came up. I think I know the answer to this, but you're the one who mentioned it in the presentation. So I'll let you explain it. Somebody asked, what is back-to-back fencing?
Back-to-back fencing is when you have a fence and within a few feet, your neighbor has a fence. That's an area where debris can collect and then ignite. So again, this is an area where you got to work with your neighbor. You know, it's great that you both have fences, but maybe you only need one. Certainly, if you want to reduce your risk, you only need one. I saw a question just happen to pop up on my screen from Steve Quarles about Wildfire Prepared Home Plus. If Wildfire Prepared Home Plus requires all of the actions, or they're going to be individually represented. So the answer is both and. You will not receive a designation for Wildfire Prepared Home Plus. You'll receive a designation for Wildfire Prepared Home, but not Plus unless you do all of those 6 elements. And we're going to be tracking. If a given home has a Wildfire Prepared Home plus 3 of the 6, that will be reflected in their file. And part of the way this is going to work with insurance companies is they're going to be able to ping a database to check whether a policyholder has a designation or not. And when they ping, it'll say yes, no for or yes or not existing for the Wildfire Prepared Home designation, and then yes or yes for the Wildfire Prepared Home Plus designation, or which of the actions within it they have met. That was a little complicated. I apologize, but I hope I made sense.
Let's see. Priscilla writes, have you seen the Fire Adapted Communities Pathways tool? And are you familiar with Fire Adapted Communities, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I'm not steeped in it, so I wouldn't want to speak to it. I am attending a workshop in a couple of months for the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. And I imagine there's going to be quite a bit of fire adapted folks there, and I look forward to learning more.
Yeah. And another question that came up earlier, and I'm not sure you can answer this, but if not, I'll try to take a crack at it. You know, the question is, well, what can tenants do? You know, and another part of that is what can community-based organizations do? And I can speak to that part of it for sure, but and I can speak to what tenants can do a little bit, but I'll let you take a crack at that first.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks who rent, right? And they don't have property rights where they live in the same way that an owner does. So that's going to differ from rental to rental and lease agreement to lease agreement. Putting on my lawyer hat for a second, I can't really speak to what your rights are because I don't understand that aspect of California law, nor have I seen what the lease agreements in question look like. I think there are probably actions that you can take, and there are actions that you'd have to work with the landlord on and encourage the landlord to undertake for the property. I do want to highlight that renters are by and large across the country massively underinsured.
Yeah.
And most renters don't have rental insurance, but it exists. And I would encourage all renters who are on this call or live in Sonoma County to look into that, because insurance can be an important financial tool, not just for homeowners, but also for renters.
Yeah, because I think you're looking at two elements of property there. You're looking at the real estate element of property and then the personal property that the renter
Right.
has. And in some ways, I'm, just off the cuff, I'm wondering if being a renter could be a bit advantageous as long as you're fully insured, because you don't have to deal with the loss of the real property if in a disaster, but that's hugely understated, but or oversimplified. But and then in terms of community-based organizations, Fire Safe Sonoma, we're the countywide Fire Safe Council. We are a community-based organization, and we're working with folks like Priscilla Abercrombie, who's in North County working with a lot of groups in that part of the county doing COPE programs and getting communities up and running that way. We're working a lot right now with small community groups, helping them become FireWise accredited, which, as Michael mentioned earlier, is kind of a pathway, or part of the path. It's along the path to reducing your overall risk. And the happy byproduct of that is oftentimes likelihood of getting an insurance reduction. But really, at the end of the day, it's about reducing your risk to your property and hoping to have something when you come back from having to evacuate. But yeah, we're all about community organizations. So our contact information is in the chat at least a couple of times. So if you want to connect with us and see what we can help you with as a community-based org, we'd be happy to do that. Let's see. The Chief Nichols is here from CAL FIRE, and he says that the tree rule in the 0 to 5 zone is unfortunate. With the proper ladder fuel removal and crown separation, that tree is potentially not a threat. If it is appropriately maintained, it will not burn the house down, but will drastically reduce the energy needed to keep it cool during the summer. That's a good point, I think. And I think I share that philosophy with Chief Nichols. I'm calling it a philosophy because I'm not the one looking at the science, you guys are. And can you kind of share with us a little bit about that ruling? I'll give you an example where it came up for us. We were privy to a bit of correspondence between an insurance person and the property owner. And essentially the conflict was the property owner has a tree in the 0 to 5, and the insurance company is saying, we're adhering to the IBHS, standard. You can't have the tree there if you want, to meet our criteria. If that's an oak, have you guys studied the specific, that specific issue, and in particular with regard to what species of trees might be okay or not, anything like that, or is that likely to happen?
Yeah, so I'll say this, and I work on legal and public policy matters for IBHS. I am not by training a wildfire researcher, engineer, or the like. So I can only kind of speak to what I've been told by my team. And that is what we understand today is that having a 0 to 5 foot zone that is entirely free of combustible material, and that zone going up as well as on the ground, is fundamental to resilience. We are still conducting, this is not where a thing where, all right, we created a wildfire prepared home, we put down our pencils, we're done with wildfire research, we're not going to work on it anymore. No, we are all summer long. We've been engaging in some leading edge wildfire research. It's a big part of what we do. It's a big part of our budget every year. We have a great team of researchers who focus exclusively on wildfire issues. So we're going to keep pushing the outer boundary of knowledge forward, and we're going to keep learning more. And if we learn more that speaks to, certain aspects of where trees are vis-a-vis the house and how high the canopy is away from the house, that will be reflected in future iterations of the program. I understand it's a pain point for a lot of people. And Chief Nichols, I'm glad you're on. As I'm sure you know, we work really closely with CAL FIRE on all kinds of things. We have a really good working relationship. And part of that is pushing back a little bit here and there when we need to. So we're just going to have to see how this all develops. But what I can promise you is that at IBHS, we are always going to be driven by the best scientific understanding that we have. That's our role.
So that's a good segue into a thought I just had, and I'm going to pull in a comment from Joan with this thought. So when codes are written for code enforcement to become part of city, county, state ordinances, regulations, and statutes, a lot of that code writing is done through committee and is evolved. The final written product is a consensus. We call them model codes, but we also call them consensus codes because they're an outgrowth of a consensus of ideally the best brains in the business in that scope of work, talking about this, trying to come to the conclusion. You guys are a 100% science-based organization. So I think that's part of the reason you're saying, nothing in the 0 to 5, whereas the state regs, I'm not sure if they're going to do that or not yet. I feel like the argument's kind of on the fence with that one at the state regulatory level. Now, with that said, so we're all splitting hairs here. So what if I have my wooden lawn chair 5 foot 6 inches away from the house? I'm intuitively, for me, it's about reducing risk. But why 5 feet? Is it because that's where you've set your control for the studies, or was it kind of arbitrary?
No, not arbitrary at all. In fact, let me, I'm looking this way because I'm looking at my, trying to get back to a particular slide I shared with you before. Well, here we go. Hold on one sec.
Okay.
PowerPoint's now catching up to my brain. All right. I'm going to share my screen for just a moment. All right. Recall this picture I showed you.
Yes.
Where we generated the embers. We ran our wind tunnel some 30 odd miles per hour. And you can see where these embers are collecting.
Yes.
That's 5 feet.
Yeah.
So if you have your wooden lawn chair right here at 5 feet 6 inches, I would tell you, you might want to move that out a couple more feet. It may not be the wisest place to put a wooden lawn chair, but I make this point just to say the 5 feet is not at all arbitrary. It is grounded in this work that shows us where those embers hit the building, come back out, and collect.
So the highest percentage of the embers that are likely to sustain a flaming ignition that will ultimately involve the house are within that 5 foot area, clearly.
That's right.
And I think I have to wonder too if part of that is driven by, the wind effect as that 20-mile-an-hour wind envelops the structure and kind of pulls those on the sidewalls anyway, parallel to the wind flow, kind of pulls those embers in against the building even through that jetty effect, if you will. I'm not a wind flow expert, I forget what you call it, a pneumatic expert, an expert in pneumatics, but I would imagine that would be how it would work. That's interesting. So really, 5 foot is like the critical area. Beyond that, you can still, I think, reduce your risk if you've got combustibles.
And think about it think about the 5 feet as a moat as well.
Yeah.
right? You don't need alligators in that moat, but you do want to have that moat. So if there is some type of ignition on your property outside of that 5-foot zone, there's a non-combustible layer before you get to your structure.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. All right. Marika, did I miss any questions in the chat? That you're aware of?
I haven't seen any. Did you address Lynn's question about houses if they're not in like a collective community, if they're like a little bit more separate in larger parcels?
Oh, I did not. I didn't see that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lynn asks, are there examples of collective community action where the community is actually a rural watershed with large parcels? I think fundamentally the question is what is feasible in a remote area where we don't have close neighbors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would tell you that this standard is the same, whether we're talking about a suburb, an exurb, or a rural community. It is focused on the home and the immediate defensible space around the home. So it is certainly possible for someone who lives in one of those more rural watershed communities to take these actions and get a designation. The comments I made before about the importance of your neighbor's resilience to your resilience, they may be, frankly, a little less important in that context than in a denser suburban context. You're not going to have the same type of conflagration risk. And that's why this notion of community resilience is so complicated, because different communities have different risk factors. And there are risk factors to rural communities that don't exist for suburban communities and vice versa. So that's why we're going to continue pushing forward the science on the community piece while we, at the same time, continue to push forward on wildfire prepared home in California and then someday elsewhere in the country.
Cool. Thank you. So I'm going to, I'm remembering that you do have a time constraint. So I'm going to try to let you get out of here at 3 if possible. But I do want to say thank you very much. We are Fire Safe Sonoma working very hard now with Firewise communities. And, I think that one of the things we will be encouraging folks to do as they endeavor to make their homes in their Firewise communities more fire safe. I think we are going to endeavor to suggest that they use the IBHS wildfire prepared home as the model to work towards in that endeavor. So anyways, good information.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on today and giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you and those of you watching on the almost live stream. We're here to help. If you have questions, please reach out via our website. The wildfireprepared.org is the program's website. We want to work with you. We want to work with Fire Safe Sonoma, where I mentioned we're working with the county government of Sonoma. We want to work with Firewise communities that want to band together to do this. We exist to help make your families and your communities safer from wildfire and other severe weather, but particularly for this conversation, wildfire. So really looking forward to further conversations, to further collaboration with Fire Safe Sonoma. And I wish you all a terrific rest of your days.
Great. Thanks.